stages, I'm pretty passionate about that thing, but this may be one of the things that I'm overall the most passionate about, and that is when we have people together like we are now, let's try to make our sharing of information as engaging as possible. And so this is a phrase, the real concept is not something I got on my own. I've done a lot of teaching and writing and workshops for group publishing over the years. Less so now that I got busier. But for years I was part of their teaching team, just kind of working for them. And the real concept came from them. Real standing for make it relational, make it experiential, make it applicable, and make it learner-based. And I think that as a country, and especially in curriculum settings, everybody's finally got the idea of this after beating that drum for 20 years. Cokesbury was for years a little bit, you know, and remember I started ministry in, like my very first youth group where I was director was in 1980. I was 4. And so back then, Sunday school classes and youth group messages still looked like somebody up front, kind of like I am now, just talking, and nothing, and everybody else just sat. And think about, we're going to talk about this a little later, even back in 1980, the adults that were teaching even back then, they were from the GI generation or the silent generation. The GI generation were those people kind of born and who grew up through World War II, or what was known as the silent generation, a little kind of smaller generation between the GI generation and the boomers. They were called the silent generation. They had gone through like the Korean War, but they had not reached the boomer, you know, because the boomers, we were born before the 60s and the protest movement, or the GI generation, which was, you know, the GI generation was the last generation known to be able to give their children an inheritance and give their kids more than they had when they started out. Boomers, now that we are older, we are, you know, we're going to be the ones that probably do finally bankrupt the Social Security system. You know, good to know, because if you're counting on that like I am, well, any of you Gen Xers, you're just... and so, so the boomer generation, our kids are all Gen Xers, and they know, and some of the millennials, they know that they're getting less. You know, we're not able to leave them anything like our parents left us. And so, back in 1980s, even when I first started, Sunday school classes were still just somebody standing up front talking for an hour, kind of like I'm just yapping now, only I'm funnier than they were back then, and more adorable. I'm counting on that. Anyway, so remember though, they were of a generation that for a majority of their life, information was still dispensed through the radio, because TV didn't come along till in the 50s, you know, right? And they weren't prevalent in households really till the 60s. We had one TV, and well, no, I can't remember when we got one. I do remember seeing President Kennedy's assassination and funeral. I remember the funeral walk. I was 5, and watching it, and it was the first time I remember seeing my parents cry. And that was something, you know. Was anybody else born then?
I was 3 years old.
Yeah, and I was 5.
And I asked my aunt there, and that's it. Why are those disturbing?
Well, and you think that's when, you know, TVs were just really coming into the household, and so it's the first political thing we all lived together, watching it together. I think.
I was 18.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine. So, so when this idea of making our educational information dispensing moments more experiential came along, we still had folks teaching within our classrooms, well, children, youth, and adults, who said, my style is a lecture style. That is my style, and if my classroom doesn't like it, that's their problem. We still were dealing with folks like this. Kind of a little bit about like what this video reminds me of. We still had a lot of teachers who their way of teaching was it's really all about me. So let's watch. As soon as I get back here again. Had it and lost it.
It is all about you. Now, the greatest collection of me worship ever assembled on one CD. It's all 20 songs, all about you. This amazing collection is great to share with friends if you haven't. Everyone can join in worship with you, for you, and about you. Because you are unique, and you love you. There is none like me. No one else. All this is for only $19.95. Operators are standing by to serve you. And I am why I sing, and I am why I live. If you order now, you'll also receive a second CD of Yule-type favorites. Call 900-ME-ME or order online at MeMyselfAndI.com. Call today because no one can embrace you like you.
Isn't that crazy? And so, you know, we were finding ourselves in teaching settings where that was kind of a little bit of the case, where it, you know, we still had teachers who it was about their style, their classroom. Yeah, and every teacher knows what they need to help them teach or dispense information better. But what we have found now is our learning times are so much more effective when we engage other people into the process. When you get a chance to smell it or see it or sense it or debrief it or talk about it. So we know that students learn, that people learn in mainly three different ways. The first one is auditory, or you're a person that can learn by hearing things, and or even by reading a book, because you know, they seem to come from the same place in the brain. Now, we are breeding that out of people. It's just kind of genetically, as decades go by and years go by, there will be less and less auditory type learners, because unlike the radio days, we don't dispense information. Even though we have podcasts, it's still a very visual world, or a very experiential world. And so kids are, at the same time as they're less and less able to listen to just a lecture and get something from it. It is interesting, though. Students today have picked up the ability, some would argue this, they actually truly have picked up the ability to multitask, multi-learn in a few different mediums at the same time. Does that make sense? They can listen to a podcast and be in a class and check something out on Google it, and do all of that at once and still have a better ability to retain the information. Now, others will argue that they're actually not multitasking. They're just going back and forth between each task so quickly. That's how they're getting it. I don't know which is true, but I know that they are. It's more irritating to us, a student that won't take the one earphone out of his ear. And they'll say, well, I can hear you and listen to this. It's more irritating to us than it is to them. Does that make sense? Because it sounds like they're not listening. So they are learning in different ways. But people learn in auditory ways or in visual ways, you know, what they see. Visual ways are, did you learn it at a play, or by watching a documentary, or by watching a movie, or seeing it lived out in some kind of drama. I am re-watching The West Wing from episode 1 on. Any of you ever watched The West Wing? Such a good show. So good. And you learn a lot about our Constitution and procedure by watching it. I hope it's all right, because I wouldn't trust if the show came out today. I like to watch Designated Survivor too, but it's a little bit more sensationalism. But anyway, you for sure learned about the Designated Survivor who becomes president from that show. That was interesting. Okay, and then the last but not least category is people learn by what they've experienced. This would be like kinesthetic learning is experiential learning by what you touched, saw, felt, especially emotions connected to something. The greatest lesson that I think we all learn is not to touch a hot stove or oven. And we probably learned that all when we were 2. Because what did our mom always say or dad say? Don't touch, it's hot, don't touch. And I went through this with all my kids and grandkids, but sure enough, raise your hand. Were you one of the ones that touched? I think probably most of us were. That came home to me again. Do you go to Tex-Mex? Any of you, go to a Tex-Mex restaurant? I know I'm from Texas, so it's by law we have to go every Sunday after church. Doesn't matter which one, you just have to go to one of them. And what do the servers usually say when they bring you a plate? Hot plate. And you only learn they mean that when you're like 6 years old and you're trying to be helpful, and he says hot plate and hands it to me or starts to put it down, and I grab it anyway. And you burn your fingertips off. And I remember feeling the pain and uncomfortable, and I started to cry. And I remembered, when he says hot plate, he means it, and I need to remember that. So I want to do a little experiment. You all think of one major life lesson that you've learned. Think of a major thing in your life that you've learned. It could be big, little, whatever, one major thing. I learned when they say hot plate, they mean it. Okay, now, in your mind, think of whether you learned that was it something you heard, like a good sermon, or was it something you saw, like a drama or a documentary or a play, or was it something you experienced and you remember the emotion and all that you were feeling and sensing as it went on, okay? So get that in your mind. Now, I want you to close your eyes. This way that we can do an experiment with voting. Nothing weird is going to happen to you, don't worry. So you close your eyes, and if the way you learned that life lesson was by something you heard, raise your hand. Close your eyes. Okay? All right. Instead, was it by something you saw? Was it in a visual way? Okay? Remember, now you only vote for one. And so put your hands down. And now, if that life lesson was learned through something you experienced or felt or something like that, raise your hand. Okay, put your hands down. This room, you can open your eyes. This room ran very true to course. There was like one auditory experiencer. There were 4 visual experiencers, and the rest of you were kinesthetic. And so that's what we want in that's what we want in a majority of our lessons. Not only on Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, Wednesday nights, do we want to introduce as many senses as possible. We want to be able to dispense that information in ways that people are going to get it. No pastor wants to work hard on that message and then come to find out nobody got anything out of it. No teacher should want to work hard on that message and then find out kids are walking away. Yet Group did a study. The study was in the late 2000s. They did it in conjunction with George Barna's research group. And the statistic, it was a study they had done on connectivity around the whole small group concept, when small groups were really coming into their own. And at that time, in the late 2000s, of all the churchgoers who say, I regularly go to church, 92% of them during that study said they walked out of church, though, having felt as if they had not personally engaged, connected with God. That they had kind of just were going through the rote of the church, Sunday morning church service and hadn't actually had a one-on-one connection with God. Now, that could be, say, a number of things, but the research that was backed up around that would actually, the percentage would even be higher now because, though I would say in the last 10 years we've gotten better at offering multi-mediums within, and so, you know, you're going to hit a little bit more of an educational target. Let's kind of look a little bit more at what I mean. In other words, learning retention. As I just stand here, if I talked all day, showed no PowerPoint, we did no sheep activity, you didn't raise your hand, we didn't do any pair shot, if I just talked for my solid 4 hours, you would retain only about 5 to 10% of what I said, which may be generous. Maybe you shouldn't retain more than 5%, but if I only talk, you'd only retain 5 to 10% of it, which I think then is an educational fail. Because we're spending 4 hours together, we ought to get something out of this, you know? However, if you add in visual, if you add in movie clips, you add in dramas, plays, anything like that, the retention level goes up to 25%. So you talk about it and you see it. A fourth of your congregation tomorrow is going to retain the point you were trying to connect, especially if it's a really good video clip that you debrief really well. So the next thing is if you involve some kind of role play in that, along with the spoken word, along with visual, a role play would be, you know, the best example I can think of on Sundays for a role play is it's how many of us do our children's sermons. I personally am a fan of including children's sermons, and I've heard arguments on both sides, not to include them, how to include them, and I gotta go along with a bishop that we used to have in Florida, much love, Bishop Cornelius Henderson, came out of Atlanta, just a great guy and died too early from cancer. But he used to say, if you cut out anything, don't cut out these 3 things. Don't cut out the doxology, don't cut out the Lord's Prayer, and don't cut out the children's sermon. Everything else is expendable. And I loved that about him. Because he's also the guy that said the 3 greatest sounds in a church is the sounds of babies crying, something else, and checks ripping out of the checkbook. That was before you could do ACH giving, online giving, because that's how I do all mine now. Except at Easter and Christmas, I always want to take an envelope. I don't know why. I want to use the fancy, pretty envelope my church sends out, but all the rest of it is online giving for me. So, so I started to say children's sermon. Now, this is the greatest example of children's. I think of that role play, 40 to 60%. We get out there and we'll do a children's sermon. You know, I'm the pastor, and I get up and I do this, and I bring this little, you know, those little pinwheel blowy things, and you blow it and it spins around. So I bring one of those to talk about Pentecost and the movement of the Holy Spirit. I just made this up, by the way. And so I have one kid blow on it, and then that child and I interact about, you know, you don't know where the wind comes from, and blah blah blah. So that's a great learning opportunity for that one kid, because I didn't bring pinwheels for all of them. So every other kid that's up there with me is back at the visual level of only retaining 25% because I didn't do the interaction, experiential thing with all of them. The best children's sermon I ever heard was the pastor who used to be at Brad's church, Donna Paramore. Best children's sermon I've ever seen, because she got this. In fact, she really thought through it. This was the cohort like 2 years ago. She got it, and something clicked in her, and she decided then that it was okay for her children's sermons to go 7 or 8 minutes, and she cut out a couple of minutes from the grown-up message and just really ran them both together so that we as adults, it was just a continued message for us, but we were so darn fascinated by what she did. All her children's sermons became interactive for everybody. But us as adults, we would just sit there and go, what the heck is she doing? But it was engaging for all of them, and they actually made things and did things and built things. And you would just sit there and go, this is the best children's sermon I have ever seen. And so then they dismissed, and she would just pick up right from that point. And so it's as if we had the experience ourselves. And I even think the one Sunday, it was something with this big bucket of sticks she had. And I think at some point in time, we started playing with the sticks or two, something like that. And she really got it. So we know that learning retention is 40-60%, but only 25% if we don't involve the rest of the kids. Contrived learning experience. Now, contrived is kind of a negative word, but what it really means is, like you did the sheep shepherd exercise. Of all the things we did today, you've got a much higher possibility of retaining the point of that because you were involved in it. So there were several points we debriefed, but it was really basically about whose voice are we listening to and what gets in the way of the voices we are listening to. Not the voices in our head, but the real voices out there. And so you were physically involved in it, so you've got a possibility of remembering, oh, I got to listen to that still small voice. Especially if after that we had focused the whole lesson around listening for God's still small voice. Maybe the scripture lesson would have been, is that Elijah or Elisha? Elijah? That was in the, the storm came and the wind. Elijah. But he heard the still small voice. So the learning retention of that is 70 to 80%. Again, contrived not being a negative word, really one of the best experiential moments we experience frequently is when we have communion on Sundays. Now, me personally, I love it when we can figure out some way to change it up, something different each time. But this is what I'm suffering through being a lifelong cradle Christian, is that I have had moments where I lost the joy of communion just because it was so by rote for me. And then I got over that, and so now it's not. But communion, we taste it, and you smell it, and you say things, and we're engaged in it, and there's movement to it. Does that make sense? And so that's a real experiential opportunity. I think it's why if we do communion on Maundy Thursday, on Holy Thursday, it can be so powerful because we're so open to doing it in different ways. Just having. I know different pastors that have had children bake the bread on Wednesday night and then help serve it on Sundays. That gets me every single dang time. I'll be bawling like a baby. The pastors in our church so love when they call me by name because they don't really know me that well. Because I'm only there I've become a big whiny baby, by the way, since the flood and the surgery. Something like that. They gave me a heart. I got a heart transplant or something. They gave me a heart and it started pumping again, and I started caring about people. But Pastor always calls me by name, and it means so much to me because I haven't had a chance to connect with them. My fault. I'm the one that's gone, 12 weeks in a row. But when I woke up that day in the hospital, and there he was just sitting there praying for me, Pastor John, and I was so sick. That first time, I was so sick, and he had to give me water and just I was fevering and everything, and he just took care of me, and boy, did it mean a lot. Here was this guy I wanted so desperately to know, but he calls me my name when I take communion, and it means so much to me. So, and then last but not least, this is why I'm such a fan of the mission idea. Whether it's global national, regional, or local. Make it work, because kids learn about servanthood. Don't try to do a series on how to be a good servant before you go, because they don't get it. But go on the trip and then make the evenings about talking through how'd you feel? What was it like when you served somebody who didn't thank you? What was it like to go to that one house and it looked like that house was pretty well off, yet you were there to do a job and you wondered why you weren't doing the house next to it? How did that feel? Kids learn from that. Who comes back from mission church even better? The adults. All of us. Because we get it. We've been without. We remember what it was like without. And we know how good it feels to give too. And so we want to make sure our learning experiences are something that we're just not wasting our time or theirs over. Now, here is some interesting things, especially for any of us within the room who give extended length messages. That could be, let's say the pastors. The average, yeah, that's right. This average 10th grader can pay attention to auditory, just spoken words, for 7 minutes before he or she goes somewhere else. The average adult can hang in there till about 12 minutes before he or she goes somewhere else. And that's where I mentioned before that polite resting duck face kind of comes in, where it looks like I'm listening, and I nod my head in a good, polite Southern woman way. But really, I'm thinking about, this afternoon I'm going to finally clean out that closet, and then I'm going to do I'll put the load of whites in when I get home, and then I'll go, wait a minute, I'm going to change my clothes, and then put that load of whites in, and then when I'm going by, I'm going to grab that stuff and put that away in the closet that I'm going to clean out, and after I'm done with the closet, then I'm going to wash the dog, and that's what we're doing, or we're putting together our grocery list. Don't disagree with me. You know I'm right. And so... Yeah, here's a list. Well, this is on my phone. And see, I'm even ruder because, I'm in a church where they tell us, well, feel free to get out your tablets or whatever to look up the scripture and blah, blah, blah. So I'll be looking at it. So I use my Bible Gateway on my phone. And so it looks like I'm just following along in scripture, and I may or may not have slipped over into note-taking mode, like list-making mode. Okay, so here's the thing. The average sophomore, 7 minutes. The average adult, 12 minutes. Don't be discouraged. Pastors in the room. That was passive aggressive. Not so passive, but very aggressive. If you feel God is calling you to a 12-minute message, a 20-minute message, 12 minutes, yes. 20 minutes, if you feel God calling you to a 20-minute message or 25-minute message, or I don't even know how the more non-denominational 45-minute people do it. That's why I'm not going there. Here's the good news. The clock does start over if you change up the medium. So you can talk for 7 minutes, show a video clip for 2, or have them pick up now, all of this plays out differently depending on your setting. Because many smaller churches don't have the capability yet for showing a video in their service. Not so much because they couldn't just roll a TV in there, because they're still having the discussion about whether TV screens belong in the sanctuary, because apparently it's of the devil. But it's not. But anyway. So the clock starts over again when you add different mediums. So if you have turn to somebody sitting next to you and talk about this. Or if you have them pick up some object that's in the pew that, maybe it's a Sunday and you're talking about raising an Ebenezer, where they made an altar of stones, or, that one scripture I love on Palm Sunday about. But if these people didn't cry out, the very rocks themselves would cry out. And you could have rocks along the pews, and ask them to hold it, be thinking of something, anything that's touchy-feely, even an object sets the clock over again. And then you could go back to talking, and it would make your dispensing of words more applicable. even more so if you allow them to debrief it, whether it's with another person or even to themselves. Okay, so here is an interesting thing. It's a little teaching skill. Okay. The average teacher rescues a question after 30 seconds of silence. I would actually bet that that's more like 15 seconds of silence. Here's what I mean. Let's say Christine is the grown-up at that table, and all the rest of you are 8th graders. You're all 8th grade girls. So, be an 8th grade girl. There you go. You know, and yeah, right. Shoot me. Yeah, Christine says it's true. And so Christine asks a question, and she's silent. And nobody says anything, and everybody just stares at her like a deer caught in the headlights. And then 10, 15 minutes goes by, and she just figures y'all didn't hear her, so she asks the question again. Only seconds, right, yeah, seconds. And she rephrases it, because obviously she must have asked the wrong thing the first time. And then you all still stare at her like she's sitting there with no pants on or something weird. So let's just say Mandy is the second adult in the room, because of course you never teach a class. You don't have any Sunday school classes without 2 adults in it, right? Yeah, So Mandy's the second adult. So more silence goes by, and Mandy assumes, well, Christine must have just asked it wrong. So so the second adult rescues and re-asks the question. No, what she's trying to say is, problem is we have to allow your kids more time of silence to process what your question was and what their answer is. And we get nervous, so we rescue, and every time we rescue the question, our kids know that you have officially let them off the hook of being responsible for an answer. And so now, let's just say Mama Caro is going to come and teach a class. I have 7 children. They are mean and cranky kids. I can outlast any of you in the silence competition. So I will ask the question, especially since if I have good questions written down, we're going to talk about what makes a good question, what makes a great question. If I have a good to great question written down, I'm going to know that that's a good question, and I don't have to restate it because I didn't stumble over my words. I can ask you, and I can wait for silence. In this concept of adding in like pair shares or small groups or trios or table conversations, it is a training process. Your kids will get better at it as time goes along. But if you keep rescuing it, every introvert at the table will know that you're going to not make them speak. And every extrovert at the table knows you won't allow them to speak. So, kind of get what I'm saying? It takes a little bit of practice. And then, you all have gotten used to it. You know, if I ask you a question and talk about it to a partner, you're going to turn to a partner and do it because you've gotten used to me doing that. Does that make sense? So when it'd be funny, it might be funny learning, to me it'd be horrible because I hate what my voice sounds like when I have to listen to it. My voice sounds much huskier and cooler in my head. And then I listen to myself and I go, I sound like a squirrel. I go, what's that? So you might just record yourself on your phone and listen to it in the privacy of your own room so nobody else has to hear it, and listen to what your question-asking technique is. Again, we'll talk about that more. But here's what real learning is. Real learning provides an opportunity for students to build relationships with each other. Now, here's the difference. When we, as a person up front, just take large group answers, we're really only having them build a relationship with us. But we're not the ones going to school with those kids. Or we're not the ones even going to work with those adults. So I want students, children even, to learn how to talk to each other about matters of faith. And this is why the idea of pair shares, trios, foursomes, whatever, is so important because they get used to at church having conversations where they wrestle with the things of God. So it builds relationships. And then in adding any kind of experience keeps it from being dull and boring. Plus, we'll talk a little bit more, when you add movement or experiential, we know that adding movement helps kids who are struggling sitting still. But when you add any kind of experiential, whether it's sight, touch, think, add the emotion to it, it cements the learning much better. Applicable, this is probably the biggest thing I crave out of a sermon on a Sunday. You spend a lot of time, Pastor, putting that message together, and you quoted a lot of old dead people. I don't want to hear what Bonhoeffer said anymore. I want to know what you think. It's somebody alive, I know, but that's just me. You know how, well, anyway, shut up, Stephanie. I want to hear your story. I want to hear stories that, and in fact, that latest study that came out studying millennials found that to be true. Millennials are not joining churches based on music. The music argument was a baby boomer argument. Millennials don't care if it's traditional or don't care if it's contemporary. They care about is the pastor preaching the Word of God, and is it said in relevant ways that apply to me. The conundrum is we've got pastors that are doing a great job of speaking the Word of God. The problem is they're not always making it applicable where people are at. It's hard to do that. You got to be a little bit more engaging, experiential, kinesthetic, and know who your audience is. Okay, but I started to say my biggest challenge is I don't want to walk out on a Sunday without Pastor Tommy telling me, now here's what I shared with you, and here are 3 things I want you to try because of this. Or 2 things, or 1 thing, or 5 things. And even better, if Pastor Tommy says to me, and if y'all think y'all have trouble remembering this, as you go out today, there'll be a sheet handed out at the door that says, here's the 5 things from my message I want you to try because of what we studied today. Does that make sense? Give me specific application. Give me the practical idea. And you know, this comes from the busier your church is, the more the busy people in your church want you to tell them the application moment. Because you've got, you know, I don't know your church setting, but the church I was at last week, Second Pres, that's a State Farm town. State Farm is located there. Their international headquarters is located there. And just across the street from the church is the former State Farm building. They've since moved on the outskirts of town. I met with CEOs and high-level people from a bunch of different companies, and they're the ones that will tell you, don't make me work for it. It's okay to tell me what I should do because of this. Tell me to go and do 3 acts of random kindness. You know, so I have that reminder, otherwise I'm going to forget. So making our messages and allow an application moment. And then, last but not least, we'll talk about what this looks like. Making sure that what we share is learner-based, not teacher-based. What's the difference? Teachers, and that means any pastor sharing a message in the room, any small group leader, any youth group lesson leader, anybody that's given a message on something. Think about who your crowd is and how they need to learn it, not what your comfort zone is. It is kind of much easier just to stand up and have the mic and prepare a lesson and just talk. But that's not always what's going to cement it. So we have to think about the people we're speaking to and not what it is we need most. It is, for me then, why in most settings I'll not be ever behind the pulpit. If I can't remember what I'm going to say, then a music stand off to the side will do it. Because maybe this is a little bit about me and a little bit about them. I want to be with the people I'm talking to. But I think they want me to be be with them as well. I hope. And that's why I don't want to be too far away, up on the stage far away. And so I kind of got over that a long time ago. And we'll talk about what else learner-based means, because you'll hear me go on a little teacher tirade. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pretend that we're having a lesson. So I'm going to be the Sunday school teacher, and this is an adult classroom, and we're trying out this new concept of Saturday Sunday school, which is, kind of an oxymoron, or two things that don't, because it's Saturday, so it would be Saturday school, but then we think, well, what are we, Greek or Jewish, or I don't know, whatever Saturday school would apply to.
Or detention.
Or what?
Or detention for being bad.
Oh, yeah. Oh, true. I didn't go that way. I've never spent any time in detention, Brad.
I'm not saying that I have.
Well, I did twice. No, once. Mr.
Deborah?
Allen gave me a detention because he knew my dad. My dad was the pastor in town, and I may or may not have been kissing my boyfriend in the hallway. So my boyfriend and I, whose dad was the president of the church council of our church, we may or may not have gotten busted. But anyway, just saying. Okay, so anyway, it's going to be a Saturday Sunday school classroom. Then what we're going to do is after we participate in this lesson, we'll step back and debrief it, okay? Okay, so, hey everybody. I just want to thank you for being a part of this experiment. We're trying out what Sunday school might look like if we do it on a Saturday instead of a busy Sunday morning. So thanks for being here. I'm so tickled to see so many of you show up on a Saturday for this. And so, help yourself to some coffee and juice, and there's muffins back there. Grateful that you're here. Our scripture today, to get us started, you'll see on the screen, is from 1 John chapter 4. And let me just read it to you. Anyone who says he loves God, but in fact hates a brother or sister, that person then is a liar. He doesn't love his brother or sister whom he has seen, so he sure can't love God whom he has not seen. So, what is love then? If do we actually really love one another? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. To do that, I would love for you to find a partner, not anybody sitting at your table, but so everybody stand up. You're not going to need, I don't think, to take anything with you. But you can take your soda or whatever beverage you have or whatever like that if you wish. But when I say go, find a partner who is not sitting at your table, and then you and your partner can just sit and get comfortable. All right? Anywhere in the room. Ready, set, go. Great. Okay. So, I would like you in your partnership to determine which one of you is going to be the interviewer. One of you is going to be the interviewer. That's all I'm going to tell you. But decide which one of you is going to be the interviewer. Okay. Raise your hand if you're the interviewer. Okay, you got the easy job. Okay. You slackers that didn't take the interviewer job, here's what you're going to do. When I say go, you, the interviewee, are going to have just 2 minutes. It's only 120 seconds, to answer just one question. Interviewers, you can only say this one thing. You can only ask this one question. It's the only thing you can say. And the question is, what is love? Or, what is love? Or, what is love? And gee whiz, interviewees, like I said, it's only 2 minutes, only 120 seconds. Some of you interviewees are pastors, and you're thinking, how can you only speak for 7 to 12 minutes, and now it's only 2 minutes? I think you can do this. So I'm going to set a timer here. Remember, interviewers, you only can ask, what is love? Interviewees, you have 2 minutes. You got to fill that space with conversation. All right? Everybody got that? On your mark, get set, and I'll even tell you when you got only a minute left, okay? Go! "90 seconds. I'm seeing a lot of quiet. 1 minute left, just 60 seconds. I should be hearing more conversation out of some of you. Just 30 seconds left. The question is, you know what the question is, just 30 seconds. I see you. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up! Yay! Okay. Oh my goodness. Some of you people. Anyways, well, let me just say, it took at least a minute before I think I heard somebody start singing, "What is love? Do with it." Oh, that's the other one. What has love got to do with it? Now, I didn't hear it, but there was a lot of quiet. Eventually, I usually hear, "Love is patient. Love is kind.
Somebody get married.
It is not rude. It is not self-seeking." So I usually hear a couple of songs, or I hear scripture. Those of you that were interviewers, what was your experience like? What was going on inside of you as you were participating in this?
I wanted to help her out.
You wanted to help her out. You wanted to help her, why?
Because I could see that she was struggling.
You could see she was struggling. Okay. Deborah.
We had the opposite of her. I should have recorded that. Because that was amazing. I was so enthralled. She said things, I was like, oh no, he was so eloquent. I was so enthralled. It was with the perfect pre-relational care. And I was like, I see you before I'm very
Okay, anybody else that was an interviewer?
I just read that ingredients to cracker jacks.
Yeah.
The greatest command, love one another for love of God. I mean, that's just what kept going.
Those of you that were interviewees, now what was your experience?
I like this now.
And why, Tommy?
Because I thought, there's so many ways you can go. You can say that there's so many things I love.
Sure.
But you had wanted some feedback, and so like your conversations with give and take, and you're very
direction and not just
What is
grab
that?
things out of the air, you know.
Yeah, it's true. Now imagine this setting, and if you were in another setting where you didn't get to give any, this might remind us of some other settings even within our church where brilliant things said and we don't get to talk back and forth. But anyway, we're not going to debrief this because we're in the middle of Saturday school, so shut up, Stephanie. What did you think of the question? Good, bad? What was wrong? What worked or what was wrong with the question? Vague. Too big. Big question. Okay, I'm going to narrow it down for you then. Now this is going to take a little bit of a turn. Kind of an ugly turn. When I was little, let's see, I was 4, my sister was 1, my dad was at his, what they called vicarage, because my dad was a Lutheran pastor, and so we were out in Montana, and my dad was pastoring this little country ranchers church out there. And so my Mom and my sister Kim and I were walking over from the parsonage to my dad's office, and Mom was taking them lunch. And back then, kids, they had this thing called glass bottles, and your soda came in glass bottles, and everybody drank 7-Up. And it's in glass bottles, because they didn't have aluminum yet. So my mom gives my sister, the 1-year-old, this glass bottle to carry, and she's swinging it, my sister. And my mom just gets through saying, now, Kimberly, Ruth, you're going to drop that, and you're going to hurt yourself. And right after that, Kimberly drops it, swings, it breaks, but she still picks up part of it, swings it back, and it cuts me in the leg. And I got like this scar. It's at least 3/4 of an inch long. At least, look how horrible. I don't know, it's there like somewhere. And you can't see it, cheap whiz. No sympathy. Okay, I'll show you. Never mind.
No.
So I got this scar from that. And I remember it vividly because it's the first emergency room trip. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to the emergency room. You know what my second thought was? Good thing I have on clean underwear. Because Mom always said, make sure you put on clean underwear in case you have an emergency, right? And so I remember I'm 4, and I remember we're going into the emergency room, and a guy standing outside smoking a cigarette, and he accidentally burns me in the arm. And I remember thinking, this is not Stephanie Wilson Day. I remember thinking that. So anyway, that was my first scar story. Here's what I'm going to do. Starting with the person wearing the most blue, and you decide who that is. Starting with the person wearing the most blue. Person with the most blue, you're going to have 1 minute, and then after a minute goes, I'll time it, and I'm going to call out switch, and then I want the other person to answer the question. And the question is this: share the story, and you can show it if you want to. Share the story of any scar you have and how you got it. Okay, so you'll have just 1 minute when I say go, because I want to get my timer already, and then I'll call out switch, and you're going to switch it. And so let me move down. Okay, ready? On your mark, get set, go. Okay, now switch to the other person in your partnership. Okay, no groups of 4. You're just in groups of 2. You're just in groups of 2. Switch to the other person. Okay. Okay, that's all right. Make sure you switched. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Okay, anybody want to share their star story or their partner's star story? There's always somebody who's got an interesting one.
He had one. He had where he got her.
I was probably third grade, and I was in Iowa on a playground, and I had a work stocking cap on, and I at that time you could get the leather jackets, and it was a smaller kid's jacket. And I was goofing around, and the kid shoved me, and I hit the corner of a brick building, school building. I didn't think anything of it. I went and walked over to one of the old round parking things that used to have, and I sat on it, and one of the girls at recess time came up and yelled at me, "Mark, you're bleeding." And I went like this, and I'm like, "Yeah, I got blood." She went and got the teacher. The teacher came running over, scared to death, screaming. We went and got the nurse, went inside, they pulled off my stocking cap, and it was filled with blood. I had blood on the collar of my jacket that never came out. I got like 2 or 3 stitches from a scar back here, and it was rural Iowa, so I had to get my aunt out of work to come get me, because my mom was a school teacher, to meet me at the house and then take me down to the doctor to get the doctor to look at to put the 2 stitches in his office.
But did you have on clean underwear?
Before the accident, yes.
By that time, yes, I did. And one more. Anybody else's? Well, one of the things about scars is that we can show, physical scars. I got like a little scar. Well, here it is. You learn lessons from. This one should have gotten stitches, but it's the reason why I now know that when something breaks inside of a sink full of soapy water, find something else to reach down and try to pull the drain plug out rather than your hand. Because when it breaks and it cuts you, and then you should go to the emergency room, but you don't have health insurance at the time, then, it's bad. And then some other scars run deeper than that. Anybody see the movie Shrek, and you know that one scene where the donkey and Shrek are in the field, and I do the worst accents, and the donkey character, Eddie Murphy, goes, ogres, they're like parfaits, and then Shrek says something like, no, they're not like I can't do a Scottish accent. No, they're not like parfaits. Ogres have layers, and so to whatever layer you feel comfortable with, I'd like you to share maybe a scar that's not on the outside, but a scar that might be on the inside. Now, to whatever comfortability level. You don't have to tell your latest, deepest wound. If you don't wish to, whatever is comfortable for you. I'm going to share one with you. I was just sitting here thinking, what scar story do I want to share? Because I'm so darn happy right now. The flood was the best thing to happen to us. Even my unexpected surgery was the best thing to happen to us. Many, many, many benefits. But here's a scar that's healed. Here's a little story but it's a scar that's healed. Yours may be still open or not. But that same sister that cut me with her 7-Up bottle, I'm one of 9. There's 9 of us. And I land in the middle, so that'll tell all you psychology majors something. And so that same sister and I we're full-blooded sisters, and we had a contentious relationship growing up. She just doesn't do anything like me. We're just so different in so many ways. And I remember when she was like 19, and then I would have been 22 and pregnant with our first, and she and I getting into this fight. And she threw her shoes at me. I don't know what I did to deserve that, but she threw her shoes at me, and they hit me in the head, and I was over emotional because I was pregnant at the time, you know, and I don't even remember what we were fighting about. And we just really had this contention. But like I said, we just really have not gotten along until we got too old to care about that anymore. And so now she lives in the add-on mother-in-law apartment at my house, and we get on as thick as thieves because we can ignore each other for 2 or 3 weeks on end. Find out she's got a day off and I got a day off, and we'll say, "Hey, you want to play 18 holes?" Don't get excited. It's on we. We would actually not go out on the golf course and walk and get sweaty. It's Houston, please. I haven't seen this. That's why I have vitamin D deficiency. I don't see the sun. I'm a vampire. So we'll play 18 holes or 36 holes on Wii and just sit. And the other night we had one of our Wii nights and put on Jesus Christ Superstar, the soundtrack from the stage version they played on Easter evening. And we'll just, because we know all the words, because we used to put on neighborhood performances as kids of the original Jesus Christ Superstar. And don't be praying for my soul, because you think it's sacrilegious. It was great. No, our performances weren't great, but anyway, it was a great time. So my sister and I, we don't have that same contentious relationship. It's a scar that's healed. Somewhere along the way, we found love within each other's differences. We're still very different in how we approach life and who we are as people. We travel beautifully together because we'll go on international trips, and if one of us feels like going, we do, and if the other one feels like staying in, no problem. We each just go our whatever we need to do, and if we feel like going together, great. So that's a scar that's healed. I would love for each one of you to share, to whatever layer you feel comfortable, some kind of scar on the inside that you've had. Maybe it's healed, maybe it's still open, some kind of love situation that you're struggling with. And there's really no time limit. Each one of you can take 2 or 3 minutes to share your story, and just leave 2 or 3 minutes for the other person to share their story. Okay? Everybody got it? All right. Ready? Go.
I got a wonderful cake. My Ota is her name that wrote on there. Congrats, grats. So I had to write it out.
Some of the deepest, darkest parts of the internal scars that I have in my life. And I know because of my faith that Jesus has been the nearest word in my life through my husband. And I think that's been the most gracious and profound way that Jesus has intervened in my life in some of the darkest moments. And that has been, it's healing, and it's comforting, it's everything that we were talking about earlier about what is is love. It's all of those things. So,
The love of Jesus through the love of your husband. Anybody else? You don't have to, by the way. It's hard enough probably to share it with one person, much less with a room of 20. Well, there is this story of a community in Africa, in a small village in Africa, that whenever any one of the villagers experiences a significant loss, like a death or something like that, the villager then marks himself or herself with a certain, tattoo symbol representing that loss. But the even more profound thing, I think anyway, is that not only does that villager take on the scar of that loss, so does the rest of the village. The rest of the village then bears the scars of that person and marks himself with the same symbol for that loss. And isn't that a little bit like what Jesus has done for us? And I will just use, I don't even know if I can read a real Bible anymore. Since I won't have to squint, and it'll be, if I just find 1 John still. 1 John chapter 4. Let's read about this a little bit. Chapter 4. I'll start about this one. Okay, so God is love. 1 John chapter 4. Listen to how God has bared our scars along with us. Beloved, let us love one another because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. God's love was revealed among us in this way. God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Beloved, since God loved us so much, we also ought to love one another. No one has seen God. If we love one another, then God is seen. God lives in us, and his love is perfected in us. And we have seen and do testify that the Father has sent his Son as the Savior of the world. God abides in those who confess that Jesus is the Son of God, and they abide in God. For we have known and believed the love that God has for us. Oh, we love because he first loved us. Those who say, I love God, and hate their brothers and sisters are liars, for they do not love a brother and sister whom they have seen, cannot love God whom they have not seen. The commandment we have from him is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also. We're commanded to do this, to love one another. So, what I'd like you to do as an opportunity for you to apply a little bit of what you learned in our Saturday school lesson today is on your table I put 2 Band-Aids. So one goes to each one of you. And then borrow a pen or pencil from somewhere on the table. And I'd like each one of you to write your name on that blank side of the Band-Aid. Don't need to open it. In fact, you don't want to open it.
Say it again for those in the back.
Write your name on the outside of the Band-Aid. Don't open it like a certain person did.
Who would do something like that?
That's what you told me, but she did it anyway. So write your name.
This coach did it right. Good for you. We did too.
They go through training. What can I say?
James, you can sit at the Methodist losing table back here with us.
Okay, now that you put your name on each Band-Aid, I'd like you to exchange Band-Aids.
Oh, Adam's going to get in trouble with one home with a Band-Aid with another one.
Exactly. So that's exactly right. So here's what I'd like to do about that, because that will be a little odd for a few of the partnerships in here. Here is an application moment for you. I'd like you to take that Band-Aid home, and I'd like you to tape it like to the medicine cabinet in your bathroom. And here's a moment. And so what you're going to do is it's going to be in the medicine cabinet. It's going to be just taped right up there for the next week or so, until we meet again for the next Saturday school class. And you're going to tape it up there, and then you're going to pray for it every time. Pray for your partner every time you see that Band-Aid. But even better yet, bring your family in and explain why the Band-Aid is there. You know, and just say that this is someone you all as a family are going to pray for. And one of the ways that we show love to each other, rather than just say we do, but one of the ways we show love for each other is to pray for people by name. And so that'll be a good conversation moment with your family, and then it'll kind of justify why you've got a strange man's name on your medicine cabinet. But here's what I'd like you to do now. Well, have you met him? I mean, look at the beard. Can you say David Crawford? But anyway, it's a good beard. Good. I try to take care of mine every week or so. So anyway, well, here's what I'd like you to do now. Just take a moment and bow your heads and pray for your partner right now. Just spend a minute or so in prayer. Thank you so much for that prayer time. Well, class, this is the end of our first Saturday school class, and I want to thank you all for coming and, you know, blah, 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 all the things we'll say at the end of class. And where's the basketball? That's our youth classes, yeah. That was where? Let's go turn. Can you turn on the Wii? All right, my friends. So let's talk a little bit then about what was happening in this little mini lesson. That took about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, something like that. Several things, and then you can kind of just jump in and share your experience. But here is what real learning does. Why, in the relational part, and like I said before, I would love for us to teach our students how to have more conversation with each other about faith. So it's going to be awkward at first. If you haven't been using one-on-ones or trios or foursomes in conversations, it could be awkward. And with middle school boys, especially the younger ones, they're just going to sit there and go, "Nah. How was youth group tonight? Nah. What'd you learn? Nah." But you're beginning to teach them, so it doesn't have to be perfection. But especially, though, it's better by middle school if your children's ministry is also doing that, because they're finding in children's curriculum, even when they provide opportunities for them to talk it out at each other, even at the age of 3 or 4, kids get it. They can communicate it, and they get it. The questions may be simpler, of course, but if our children's ministry is using this approach to education, then by the time they get to you, they'll be used to having conversation. So it gives them ability to get to know people. If you think about it, many of you are sitting with people you don't really know that well. Am I right? But now do you feel like you've shared something with each other? It's kind of interesting. It feels like, hey, we had real conversation. I get this person now. I feel like I actually would call this person a friend. I'm going to remember this person's name. We've talked about life crap together. The other thing that letting people have conversation does, the teacher doesn't always have to say all the brilliant things, as witnessed by, what I blab all day. When you give up the teaching to the power of the Holy Spirit, and you put together a group of 4, 5, 6 teenagers talking amongst each other, and maybe the only thing that the adult is doing is asking the question, what is love? Then you're allowing the Spirit of Christ to be the teacher. That Spirit of Christ can be as good as, if not way better than us. Now, we have to train our kids a little bit to do that, but it doesn't have to be us. And then our job is we let them have small group conversation. And that is why maybe we as adults kind of walk among the small groups and hear what they're doing, or maybe we take large group feedback because we can clear up any fuzzy thinking at that point. If they got off track somewhere, like my grandma died, now she's an angel. Well, honey, no, she doesn't. Grandma is a human, and you go into all the theology of that if you want to. Depends how old they are. Otherwise, you just go, yeah, sure. Small group discussing allows the introvert to talk. Introverts, if I ask you all a question, introverts didn't raise their hand to answer it. Extroverts do, because extroverts process things by nature out loud. We say things, and then we decide whether we believe what we just said or not. Right? That's what we do. So I'll say things, and then I'll go, wait a minute, I don't feel that way at all. That was stupid. Let me reel that back in. Introverts do better in small group discussion because they will participate. They're just waiting for the extroverts to shut the heck up. Extroverts will talk in small group conversation, but this is why you give timestamps. You've got to tell remember that share the scar thing? And 1 minute? That was for the extroverts in the room, because we'll just keep going till you tell us to stop. I don't know if you noticed this, but I'm an extrovert. I know. Kel's surprise. So you give timestamps, so the extrovert says to themselves, oh, I only have 1 minute. Here's my minute version. Oh, I only have 2 minutes. Here's my 2-minute version. They get more flustered if you say, oh, time is up, but you didn't give them any little warnings along the way. That's why a good teacher just quietly whispers, you got 30 more seconds, or you got 10 more seconds. It allows who's ever talking to wrap it up and and then they don't feel like you chopped them off. So the experiential part. Now, this wasn't the highest movement of any kind of activity. But it does give, when you use experiential activities, like that sheep activity we did earlier, it gives everyone a chance to participate. Because if you remember, at that time, and then with this activity, I just said, everybody stand up. And you did it. Now, I didn't say, now, class, we're going to do something just a little bit different today. Don't ever say that, because you know why? Because as soon as you say it's different, what's that student going to think? I hate it. They don't even know what you're going to say, but they're going to hate it. So I just say stand up. I didn't ask you to stand up. I'm the teacher. This is my classroom. We're going to do what I say. So I just said stand up, and you did. I said, now I want you to find a partner. In just a minute, when I say go, I want you to find a partner. This is the habit you have to work at a little bit when you're doing a lot of experiential activities. Get in the habit of saying, in just a minute, when I say go. Because if you start with the instructions first, what happens? They start to go, and then they don't hear what you say. And they go ahead and rip open the Band-Aid package anyway. So that was my fault for saying, now don't rip open the Band-Aid package. And as soon as I gave the instruction, I thought, oh, I forgot to tell them not to rip it open. And then Chandra just proved my point. You know, she's done this. So, experience. So, have you ever had the kids show up to youth group that you know they're there because they've been punished? And so, mom and dad think, well, I'm going to punish him, I'll teach him, I'm going to send him to youth group. And who really gets punished in that? The youth director, every adult that's there. Oh my word! And then, even worse than that is the parent whose kid that comes to youth group goes, well, there's no other way to punish you. I'm going to make you stay home from youth group. That's worse. Mom and dads, don't ever do that. And then teach your parents not to do that either, because if you've got a kid that's in trouble, take away something else, but don't take away youth group. They need youth group. They need Jesus Christ. It could be the one reset point they get in whatever road they're heading down. Oh my Lord, I could teach on that all day. But anyway, inexperiential, even the kid that's sitting there with their arms crossed going, you can't make me like this, is going to do it. Like if I said, everybody stand up in this room, stand against this side of the room, stand against that wall, this side of the room, stand against that wall, and I tell you to do it, you're going to go do it. The kid that hates being there isn't going to stay in the middle because they don't want you to notice what they're doing. They're going to go, and they'll go to one wall or the other. And eventually they participate. Experiential teaching gets people involved at some point in time physically. Experiential teaching deals with the wiggles. I need to get up and move every once in a while. I may or may not be one of those undiagnosed ADD type youth pastors. I know you shocked at that too. And I'm even more so since I stopped drinking so much coffee, because coffee always calmed me down. And now that I'm not drinking that much, I'm not drinking soda anymore, diet soda is anything, and then I'm only drinking like 1 cup of coffee a day, I notice my ADD levels a little higher. I have to work at that. Experiential engages other senses, and it seals in the learning principle. I really think that if you had to think back on today, you're going to remember the sheep activity the most of anything. And you're going to be able to process that more than anything. Okay, let's look at something else. When you do application, make sure that at each and every moment, or each and every particular lesson, you provide an opportunity for application. So it's not an object lesson. What was the application in this little activity we did? What do you think? Chandra.
We got to talk about what caused them hurt.
True. What caused them hurt. What else?
How Jesus can heal us.
Yeah, sure.
Even though we still have a scar.
Mm-hmm.
Because we show physically we have a scar. So we realize internally an internal scar will still be there. But we can see where we've been healed.
Great. Those are great applications. And I think to really cement like those two things and anything else you may have thought through, challenging you to take home that Band-Aid. Now that you're maybe thinking, well, the Band-Aid's just another object lesson. But not if you take it home, you share the learning with your family and you all pray for whatever that person shared. So I think you sharing what you got out of this, that that Jesus is there in the pain and in the healing, and that here's how we deal with it. We pray for each other, and the Band-Aid then becomes a pretty amazing reminder. I did this activity in a training workshop where one of my staff consultants was with me. This was in September, and I'll never forget now taking his Band-Aid home. We did it together at a church in Kansas because we had other partnerships doing it, and his Band-Aid went by my little corner of the 140 square foot camper we lived in for 3 months. And that actually was kind of a powerful time because it was a reminder that there were other people that had problems other than just me. We had no problems. We had cable, we had air conditioning, we still had a bathroom in that 140 square feet, even though it was 2 adults, a dog, and a cat. Did I mention 140 square feet? Okay, so it's not just an object lesson. We give people a chance to respond. If application happens, so does the learning from it. So for me, for an example, when I did this activity and had Anthony's Band-Aid by my little headboard, which was otherwise known as the dining table in the camper, because we'd lowered it, made another bed, I just kept remembering, wait a minute, God's bigger than all this. God's bigger. God loves me. God is bigger than all this. Look how He's shown His love. And last but not least, learner-based. Let me say that good teaching means that we're learner-based, and here's what that looks like. A learner-based teacher prepares their lesson ahead of time. A teacher-based teacher does their lesson off of their phone, reads through their lesson off of their phone at the 2 stoplights before they get to church. Do you know what I'm saying? Now, a learner-based youth leader sends out the lesson a week ahead of time or 4 or 5 days ahead of time so that they can expect other adults in their ministries to go ahead and study that lesson before they just show up on Sunday mornings or Sunday night at youth group. A learner-based teacher doesn't just wing it in teaching. A learner-based teacher looks at the setting of the classroom. Like I don't know about y'all's youth room, and I haven't seen Trevor's. So, but here's what many youth rooms look like. It's where every old, I might have said this to you before, every old grandma's couch goes to die.
Oh no, that's the parsonage.
Or the parsonage. But in youth rooms, in fact, I think that many a grandma probably has died on the couch that we give to the youth room. Yeah, I just saw one a few weeks ago at a big Methodist church in Houston. So I think as good teachers, we're concerned about the physical aspect of our classrooms. For an example, did you know that in your youth room, or in your youth Sunday school rooms, or your children's rooms, or whatever, do you know that fluorescent lighting is the worst kind of lighting for behavioral problems, especially if you've got attention deficit or hyperactive kids, ADHD or ADD kids. Fluorescent lighting is the worst, yet our churches are filled with them. But if you've got any behavioral struggles within your classroom, turn that lighting off and start using floor lamps or table lamps. You'll notice an immediate improvement in the behavior. Christine?
Matter of fact, if y'all have y'all cell phones, not right now while she's talking, but I want you to put your phone and do a slow motion video of this room, because I did that in a gymnasium for my son, and watching that, it is like a strobe light.
It is to an ADD person.
Well, it is to him, like you can see it, and so they process things so differently. It is. Because
that's part of how fluorescent lighting is structured. It's actually a series of small little flickers. Can't think. I get paid to talk. So it's a series of small little flickers, and in an ADD mind or an ADHD mind, they pick up on that. So that's why changing the setting. The neater, cleaner the lines in your youth room or your classrooms, the better. And the problem is so many youth rooms, we just let things sit there. It's where everybody donates their Bibleopoly game or Bible trivia game. We haven't played those board games in 10 years, but nobody knows how to throw it out. And there's still 4 VHS players in the corner of that room. Get rid of the junk. If you're not playing with it, get rid of it. If you're afraid somebody's going to notice, just do what I do. Wait to the cover of darkness and dump it in the First Baptist Church's dumpster. I am not kidding. I have done that several times. It has been my personal campaign. It was all through the 90s and early 2000s to get rid of all plastic flower arrangements out of churches. Even churches that I did not work at. If I saw one, I just began to slowly move it towards the door. My car would get parked there, it would go out the door, and it went in somebody else's dumpster. Because I worked at a church, because I think plastic flower arrangements are of Satan. And we had a janitor who would go dumpster diving in our dumpster knowing that we all threw out stuff. So then it would appear back. So, Trevor.
When we have the break, come down with me to the basement. I'll show you our plastic arrangement.
Well, it's history.
I want you to come down.
Without them, I could not have made the Garden of Eden.
Well, there you go. But there's this new thing called silk flowers. Even silk flowers are okay. It's just the plastic ones that my grandmother spray painted gold, especially. Meemaws, boy, good Southern woman knows how to spray paint something gold. So I think you look at the temperature in your classroom. The more junk you get rid of, your kids will behave better because they're distracted by the uneven lines. Does that make sense? The neater the room and where you have a clearly defined focal point for the lesson keeps them focused towards the focal point. But if you have other things to distract them in the room, they're distracted by all those other things and they can't keep focused on even if you may have set up this beautiful table of objects to fit your lesson, that there's too many things in the room which you, with maybe a normal interaction, don't even see those other things anymore. To some of those folks, it's just a shouting noise. Does that make sense? And so it's so important that we, as teachers, they say, a teacher takes command of her classroom or his classroom, and that includes the youth room. So let's kind of move on to good question asking. This is what we're going to close up with today. We're going to have you practice writing a little bit of your own curriculum right off this part, because then if you say something really good, I just type it up and steal it and blog on it, and I keep a check. Good questions, good question asking does not begin, the question would not begin with can, does, should, are, is, do. You know why? Yeah, you can go back to your spot if you need to. You might want to write notes, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I should have already done that. Christy named it. Did you hear what she said? Any question that begins with is, can, do, are, could, should, would, can be answered with yes or no. We want more than that. So it's important for us, again, you might have to record yourself for you to figure out what kind of questions are you asking. What is your question asking style? How much time are you giving people to answer? One of the things that I remember kind of talking with a few of our coaches about, when I'm coaching your coaches, we'll have conversations afterwards or emails afterwards. It depends, just on the setting. And one of the things that I coach on is when you ask a question that begins with is, does, can, should, do, it often can set the people you're asking the question on edge, because it either could be answered with just yes or no, or it's the kind of question where you feel like, oh my gosh, there's only one. Any question that begins with does, can, should, is, feels like there's only one answer to that question. And what if we get that question wrong? So when we're coaching folks, if we go, now Tommy, does your team have a 12-month calendar or an 18-month calendar? He may say yes, they do. But if they don't, well, first of all, there'll be a pause and we go, well, I don't know if we have a 12 or 18-month calendar, and I don't even know what she's really asking. Maybe she means on the electronic, or maybe there's a right or wrong answer. I don't know how to answer this question. I know we're going to get it wrong. And we set people on edge when we do that. We either get no answer, or we set them on edge that if we give the wrong answer, we're going to be stupid and the pastor's going to make fun of us. Like I never would. So, when a better question, is to ask one that begins with, I think that there's what, why, and how are very difficult to answer in just one-word answers. But I think what and how are the best two of those three. Why is one that often feels like that what's to follow is going to be asking a question for somebody else on the other side of the question to have to justify something. But if I say, now, Tommy, how is the calendaring process in your youth ministry team? That's not as risky, is it? Because he can say whatever it is. It's not a pass or fail. It's a here's what we do and here's what we'd like to do question. So he gets to win right from the very beginning. If I had said, why do you do the current calendaring process you do? That actually does sound a little bit more passive-aggressive, like there's something I'm digging for. And so I think good question asking. But here is great question asking. Great questions, though, are surprising and specific and personal. Now, I want to give you, see what you think of this example of a question. Great questions that are surprising, specific, and personal. What about that question? First filter, is it surprising? And if it is, tell me how. Never have. You don't usually, you didn't see that in Leviticus anywhere. I have always wanted to add little individual packets of Neosporin or something to this activity, thinking that, like if we made the mark of the cross on each other or something, thought, well, that'd be cool.
Some razor blades?
Huh?
Get some razor blades out?
Yeah, we'll all go to the tattoo parlor afterwards. Yeah, okay. That's good. Well, so I'll meet you there. So it's surprising because you don't expect Jesus in Neosporin. What about specific? What would you think? Yeah, just rescued the question. Don't do that. Because it says inner stars. What makes it personal? Yours. Because the question could have been, how has Jesus' love been like Neosporin on our inner stars? The use of the word "our" would give us the opportunity to think more globally, and we wouldn't have to share our own junk. Because we'd go, oh, well, you know, when we have a loss, we lose a loved one, or when we, you know, or when this happened or this happened, we wouldn't actually have to dig within ourselves. But the fact that it says "your" requires us to dig a little deeper. And it's really what we want. We want our students to get specific and personal because it's how, when we're broken down a little bit, it's how the Spirit comes in and kind of further cements His Word within that lesson time. Does that make sense? You know, nobody ever said it was going to be easy, but being more specific and more personal does cause application. So here's what I want you to do. Look at your table and just pick up any one object on your table. You're not going to have to throw it or anything. Pick up any one object. Okay? What I would love for you to do then is using that filter of surprising, specific, and personal, I would love for you to ask this is a real theological term, a Jesus-y question based on using that item. So whatever item you have, ask some deep, surprising, specific, and personal question based on that you could do with the youth group, based on that object you grabbed. Okay? Everybody got it? Doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to have you read them out loud and we're going to edit them for you. And, you know, we won't mock you much. Okay? Go.
I like that.
I'm going to give you a couple more minutes to write your question. 120 seconds. Okay, start wrapping up your question. All right, kind of finalize. Now let me tell you this, by the way, a great question. First of all, from an editor's standpoint, no sentence should be longer than 17 words. A great question is like 10, 12 words or less. Because the longer and more wordy it is, the more, there's just usually a better, quicker way to ask it. Just like studies have shown, a great mission statement is 8 words or less. There you go. Hey, don't blame me. I didn't say that. The experts said that. I'm just stealing it. Whoever brought the chocolate, thanks for bringing the good stuff.
That's bread.
So good.
Yes.
All right. Who's got an object and a question they want to float by the curriculum editing team? Yes, Deborah.
She ate it.
How does the starburst represent Jesus' love in your life?
How does the starburst represent Jesus' love in your life? First of all, how do you feel about the surprising filter? Pretty good, starburst and Jesus. What about specific? It is your life, yeah. Personal. I would say me, because if you really wanted to, I think the question could be a little bit narrower depending on what we wanted to use that question for. If that question was an opening question, like just to get discussion going, it would be a great one or first question or second question in flow. But if you wanted question 3 or 4, where those are usually the ones that are a little bit more specific and you've had more time and you've gotten opened up and kind of used to talking to each other, 3 or 4 to do a little personal, a little more personal. I would say the question to be a little bit more personal might be something like, how is this starburst like Jesus' love during or when you felt unloved? I don't know, just off the top of my head. Because that narrows it to a more of an internal struggle. Does that make sense? But it depends what you want it to do. You actually think about questions in that regards. Starburst would be a great theme to build a whole lesson around. There's all kinds of games you could do with Starburst. There's all kinds of snacks and stuff you could build around that. there are these two worship guys that have, and I used to say have, but really it's had now because I don't think they're actually in business now, but they were called Midnight Oil, and they were worship idea kind of guys. And they're still around and they're still doing stuff. And you can still buy their stuff. But anyway, their idea was that if you can connect any kind of learning or worship experience to an item, tangible or intangible, but especially an item or a visual in front of people, the better the chances they are to remember the lesson because it will become a permanent filter. For an example, Band-Aids. A Band-Aid, you might now always remember taping that Band-Aid to the mirror at home and that exercise. And so which will lead you back to what is love, blah, blah, blah. And so they recommend, like, if you're going to use Starburst, use it through the whole lesson. Find ways to use that common item and keep saying the same message, the same connection over and over again. What else? Who else has an item and a question? Yes, the chair recognizes Sir Tommy. How has the Holy Spirit blown an effervescent wind into your family's life? Surprising? Yeah. Nice use of the word effervescent. Specific, it was your family. Your makes it, good. Nice, extra points for effervescent. Because that kind of ties in with the bubbles. Great. Good. One more.
How does Jesus like lotion to your life?
How is Jesus like lotion to what? To your life. Surprising? I'm not sure, but for some reason I feel like we ought to find a different way to word it. And I don't want to tell you why. Let me say 2-3 words. Middle school boys. I'm going to say, or maybe never mind. Let's just not have any more of this discussion. Oh my gosh, I'm getting myself deeper. Lordy, turn the camera off.
That's something that we need to know. That whenever people say, oh, get your mind out of the gutter. As a middle school, Sunday school teacher, you have to.
You have to think about how they're going to respond.
How they think about those things.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, I would have never thought about that. That's okay. Middle school boys will.
They will. And so you have to, you always have to think about how they're going to think. And so that's when you can still do the question. Yeah, but you can't stop thinking about what I already, and so then they never get the true intent of the question if we do anything that would not pass their.
Okay, can we let my pastor?
Yes,
I think that was the two ideas.
More like, how can Jesus smooth the rough edges?
There you go. How can Jesus smooth the rough edges in our life? It would be so the question before that would be some way of them sharing what the rough edges, what their name, 1 or 2 of your rough, raw edges. And they're going to say, well, what's a raw edge? What's a rough edge? And you're going to give some example. Maybe that's a great moment in the lesson planning of this, because then you would stop and have a video clip of an example of a teenager with some kind of rough edge, raw edge. And you'd ask them, what was the raw edge in that video clip? Okay, so now you've got an idea of that. Here's my question to you. Now think and maybe, and then I was thinking of using those, we better stay away from the lotion. I was thinking of those little hotel size I always get, and if they could write on the label like a few things, but just that way there'd be an object or something like that. But and then you'd ask your question. I love that, and so there could still be a way that you could appropriately bring in some kind of balm to it. I use some kind of way. Something like that you could still bring that balm to that concept and still get the point across with a real object. Brad, what time are we expecting over there? Or do we have time for a closing video clip?
Do it. And then because we're going to do something else before we leave this space.
Oh, we're going to do something else before we leave this space. So we're going to close out with a Skit Guys clip. I don't think I've shown you this clip yet. I showed you the one about Tad, the most annoying kid in the youth group, right? Did I show you the one about Billy, the 5-year-old in Sunday school? I don't think I have. So this is just sort of a reminder to all of us as we're teaching why it's so important to give our kids, make it real in our teaching, our messages, our lesson. And then ultimately, by working with children and youth, the lessons they ultimately teach us.
I'm going to be your substitute Sunday school teacher.
Hi, teacher.
Hi.
Hi, what's your name?
Well, my name is Mr. Drummond.
What you talking about?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I'm talking about. I'm here to be your substitute.
Wait, where's Miss Linda?
Well, Miss Linda is my wife. And she's been sick, okay? And so I know you've had a lot of substitute Sunday school teachers.
We've got a lot.
But I'm going to be your permanent.
I've run most of them off.
I bet you have. Yeah, it's you seem like that type of child. But I'm going to be.
You're Miss Linda's husband?
I'm Miss Linda's husband.
She can do better.
Well, we do what we can. Yeah. I like you kids because you just speak truth all the time.
I'll tell you what I'm thinking.
There you go, buddy. There you go. Well, let me tell you what I'm thinking. I'm going to be your permanent Sunday school teacher for a little bit because, I think I know because my wife, Miss Linda, isn't feeling very good. So I'm just going to be here for you guys, okay?
Yeah.
Miss Linda asked me if I would, so here I am, okay? Well, I think you'll catch up. What's your name?
My name's Billy. Like the goat. But I'm not really a goat.
You're just a little boy.
I'm just a kid.
You're just a little boy.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, hello, class. Why don't we start this? I would love to sing a song. I think Miss Linda.
I love to sing songs.
Okay. Well, good.
I love to sing songs to God.
Okay.
Like I love to sing. Jesus loves me. Yes, I know. For the Bible done told me so. I'm going to be the next American Idol.
You do seem to have the voice. What is this?
That's not sign language. It's the Bible told me so. Like you're sewing. Remember there's those memory verses in my underwear. In case I have an accident.
Just knowing you just a little bit. It's probably a good thing for a boy like you, huh? Yeah.
I just did.
That's just not, you did not say that at all. That's just too much. Okay, all right. I'm going to teach you, well, you probably already know this song, class. It's one of Mrs. Linda's favorite songs, okay? And it's called My God Is So Big.
Oh, no, that's Miss Linda's song.
I know, she loves it.
You don't sing it.
Well, no, I think it would be great.
Miss Linda's.
I understand.
You don't sing it.
No, it would be okay.
You don't sing it.
She loves that song.
I don't think that's...
It's okay. It's okay. My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do for you. Okay? We know the song.
Yeah, that's Miss Linda's song. You don't even sing it good. Have you ever sung that before?
No, I don't have the
That was awful.
Listen to me. I'm trying, okay? My wife, Miss Linda, is going to be here, so here I am. So I'm trying my best, okay? My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do for you.
Yeah, it gets worse when you sing it more.
Okay. We're going to sing this
I don't want to sing it.
We're going to sing it. Billy, give me your eyes. Give me your eyes.
No, you can't have my eyes.
I did not mean.
Why do I even keep my eyes?
No, I did not mean.
You said give me your eyes. You said give me your eyes.
You're good. You're good. We're good. Okay. Okay. So here we go. Okay. Give me your ears.
No, you can't. What are you gonna do to me? This is the worst day of Sunday school ever. I don't even know what to do.
Okay. All right. Okay.
You're a freak.
Let's just start. Okay, listen to me.
Don't touch! Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square. It's really a rectangle. Nothing rhymes with rectangle. You're not supposed to pick your nose in class. I get in trouble for that.
I know.
You don't wipe it on your shirt.
You made me chuckle. I blew snot out my nose. Okay.
That doesn't make me like you more. Miss Linda doesn't do that.
Let's just sing the song. Okay? It's a good
I
song.
don't think we should. I think we should sing Jesus Loves Me.
That's a beautiful song.
Yeah, let's sing
But
that.
let's just sing this.
I think we should sing Jesus Loves Me.
Okay.
It says, Jesus loves me, this I know. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so.
Yeah.
I like that song.
It's a good
We should sing that song, because I can sing that song frontwards and backwards.
So, little Billy,
Uh-huh.
what did you just say?
I'm singing frontwards and backwards.
Well, that's an ad-lib I'd like to see. Okay, little Billy. Okay.
I don't want to. Don't touch.
Okay.
You want your needs and you teach your kids.
Little Billy, go ahead and sing it back.
I don't have to.
No, you don't. You sing it. You
I don't have to.
please.
Fine, I'll sing it back.
Here we go. Go ahead.
Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so.
Touche, my friend, touche.
Me loves Jesus, yes. Me loves Jesus, yes. Me loves Jesus, yes. So tell the Bible me so.
Okay, nice song. Let's just stick with this one, okay?
Oh, sing it.
No, it's really good. Okay, let's just go with it, okay?
Oh.
I thank Miss Linda. Okay. Well, I know she taught you all sign language.
Yes, she did.
Signs with the songs,
Yeah.
motions with the songs.
We're motions.
Well, that'll make it fun. Okay, so let's do that, okay? My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. So mighty. So mighty, mighty, mighty. I should have blew my nose before I came to this class.
You think it's funny, but it's not.
My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do for you. Okay, see?
I still don't want to sing.
No, you.
Let's go.
It's
I have a question.
No,
I have a
no
question.
class. We
I have a
just need to move on
I
with
have
this
a
song.
question.
Okay.
I have a question.
Billy,
Yes.
does it have to do with the song?
Yes.
Does it have to?
Yes.
Are you being 100% honest?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, with the song.
Yes.
Now you're in trouble. You got the women's ministry involved.
They're right next door. What are you supposed to do?
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question.
All right. What does it have to do with the song?
Yes.
Okay. What?
Yes.
Okay. What is your question?
Do you think that there were unicorns on Noah's Ark?
Okay. No, there were no.
No, my dad says there could be.
I don't think so.
Are you calling my dad a liar?
I'm calling you. I don't know your dad.
I think there could be too.
I don't know if there was. Yeah, with the horns? Yeah, with their tail. With the horn? A unicorn. This unicorn is a devil. Unicorn devil, David Crowder. Okay. No more questions. No more questions. I still don't talking. Another question. I think that makes it important. This better have to do. You need psychiatric help. That's what my mom says. She says I should talk to Dr. Phil. You kind of look like Dr. Phil. Okay. You ever notice that Dr. Phil looks like a walrus? Okay, all right. I have a question. You have to call on my name. Okay. What is it, Mr. Goat? Okay, Mr. Clean. Okay, all right. Here we go with the song. Here we go. Okay. My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. There's my God is Jesus. So mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do. Oh yeah. My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. What, Billy? No, let's just sing the song. Let's just sing the song. Why do you have to sing your song? It would really be great. It doesn't make any sense. I'm going to tell you right now. You're not Miss Linda. You don't look like Miss Linda. You don't sound like Miss Linda. You don't smell like Miss Linda. You're not as nice as Miss Linda. You're coming here trying to sing Miss Linda's song. And I don't want to sing why we sing Miss Linda's song. I just want to sing. And can you give me one reason why we should sing your song? Because my wife has a kid. Because my wife, Miss Linda, is very, very sick. And she asked me if I would come here this morning, and I just thought I could sing Miss Linda's favorite song because I know I'm not Miss Linda. And I just wanted to sing this song because I just wanted to be reminded this morning of how big and how strong God is, because I have to go home and I need to be strong for her. I need to be very, very strong for her. And she is so courageous and she has so much faith. And I just thought if we could just sing that song, that could remind me that there's nothing my God cannot do for me and for Miss Linda. Because I don't know what I'm going to do if she... I'm sorry. That was inappropriate, and it's just been one of those. It's just been one of those really tough times. I'm just so. My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. There's nothing my God can